The massive cargo ship Prosperity drifted silently through the void between star systems, its hull scarred by countless journeys through hostile space. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge, watching the swirling colors of hyperspace fade as they dropped back into normal space. The view that greeted them made her stomach turn. Ahead lay the mining colony of Kepler 442b, but something was terribly wrong. The orbital stations that should have been bustling with activity hung dark and silent. Emergency beacons flashed weakly from the planet's surface, painting the bridge an ominous red light. "Captain, we're receiving a distress signal," reported Lieutenant Chan, his voice tight with concern. It's from the colonial governor." Elena nodded grimly. "Put it through." The holographic display flickered to life, revealing Governor Martinez. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his face streaked with dirt and what looked like tears. Behind him, Elena could see the ruins of what had once been the colony's administrative center. "This is Governor Martinez of Kepler 442b, the recording began, his voice shaking. "If anyone receives this message, please help us. 3 days ago, they came. The Draknari. We knew of them only through whispered stories from the Outer Rim colonies. We thought they were myths." The image shifted, showing massive, reptilian creatures moving through the colony's streets. Each Draknari stood nearly 4 meters tall, their scales shimmering with an otherworldly darkness that seemed to absorb light itself. Their eyes glowed like molten gold, and, when they opened their mouths, rows of crystalline teeth caught the light like deadly prisms. "They destroyed our defenses in minutes," Martinez continued. "Our weapons, they just bounced off their scales. They took prisoners, but not for what we expected. They didn't want our resources or our technology. They wanted a child." Elena felt her blood run cold. Around the bridge, her crew exchanged horrified glances. "They speak our language somehow," the governor's voice cracked. "Their leader, a massive creature they call the Flamekeeper, demanded we surrender a human child to them. They said it was an ancient tradition, offering to appease their hunger for what they called pure essence. They gave us 7 days to comply, or they would consume every living soul on this planet." The recording flickered, showing more devastation. Buildings lay in ruins, their walls melted rather than broken, as if exposed to incredible heat. "That was 4 days ago," Martinez whispered. "We have 3 days left. Our long-range communications are down. If anyone can hear this, we have 230 families here, including 47 children. We don't know what to do. How do you choose? How do you sacrifice one innocent life to save others?" The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in heavy silence. Elena stared at the dark planet below. As a merchant captain, she'd seen the worst of what the galaxy had to offer. Pirates, slavers, corrupt officials who would sell their own mothers for a quick profit. But this was different. This was a choice between the unthinkable and the impossible. "Captain," said Chief Engineer Torres, a gruff man whose own daughter was barely 8 years old. "We can't just leave them. Our cargo hold is full of mining equipment," added Dr. Sarah Kim, the ship's medical officer. "Nothing that could help against creatures like that." Elena turned to face her crew. The Prosperity wasn't a warship. They had basic defensive systems, enough to scare off most pirates, but nothing that could challenge beings who had shrugged off military-grade weapons. "Chan, scan the planet. Give me everything you can find about these Draknari." The lieutenant's fingers danced across his console. "Captain, the energy readings are unlike anything in our databases. The creatures seem to generate massive amounts of heat internally. Their ships, if you can call them that, appear to be grown rather than built. Organic technology, but more advanced than anything the Zephyrians or Crystalline Collective have developed." Dr. Kim pulled up additional data on her medical scanner. The atmospheric readings show trace amounts of exotic particles. "Whatever these beings are, they're not from our local galaxy cluster." Elena walked to the main viewport, studying the wounded planet below. Somewhere down there, families were huddled in fear, knowing that in 3 days they might have to make an impossible choice. Parents were looking at their children, wondering if they could sacrifice one to save the rest. But there was something else gnawing at her mind. In her 15 years as a merchant captain, she'd learned to read between the lines of every deal, every negotiation. Something about this situation didn't feel right. "Torres, how long would it take to modify our cargo transporters?" she asked suddenly. The engineer looked confused. "For what purpose, Captain?" I want to transport a person directly onto one of their vessels without them detecting it. The bridge crew stared at her in shock. Captain, Shin said carefully, that would be suicide. Even if we could get past their defenses, these creatures are massive and, clearly hostile. Elena turned to face them, her expression grim but determined. Maybe. But, I've spent my career dealing with bullies and predators. They all have one thing in common: they never expect someone to fight back intelligently. She walked to the communications console. I'm going to contact the colony directly. We're going to offer them a different solution. Dr. Kim stepped forward. What are you thinking, Elena? I'm thinking that any species advanced enough to travel between galaxies doesn't need to resort to primitive intimidation tactics to get what they want. This whole offering demand feels like theater. Like they're playing a role rather than following genuine need. Torres scratched his beard thoughtfully. You think it's some kind of test? I think it's something more complex than simple predation, Elena replied. And, if I'm right, then, maybe there's a way to solve this that doesn't involve sacrificing anyone. She opened a channel to the planet's surface. Kepler 442b colony, this is Captain Rodriguez of the merchant vessel Prosperity. Governor Martinez, if you're receiving this, please respond. The reply came quickly, filled with desperate hope. Captain Rodriguez. Thank God, we thought no one was coming. Do you have military support? Can you evacuate us? Governor, I need you to listen carefully. We're going to try something unconventional. Instead of choosing a child from your colony, I'm going to offer myself to these Draknari. The silence that followed was deafening. Captain, with respect, you don't understand, Martinez's voice finally came through, filled with anguish. They specifically demanded a human child. They said adult minds are too corrupted for their purposes. Elena smiled grimly. That's exactly what I'm counting on. Over the next several hours, Elena worked with her crew to develop their plan. It was risky beyond measure, but it was the only option she could live with. They studied every piece of data they could gather about the Draknari, looking for weaknesses, patterns, anything that might give them an advantage. What they discovered was troubling and fascinating in equal measure. The Draknari ships weren't just organic, they were alive. Massive creatures that had been modified to serve as vessels, with the Draknari living symbiotically within them. The energy signatures suggested a form of biological technology that made their ships nearly indestructible but also potentially vulnerable in unexpected ways. Dr. Kim made the most important discovery. Elena, look at this. The exotic particles they're generating aren't random. There's a pattern here, almost like a communication protocol. What kind of communication? I'm not sure, but it's definitely structured. If I didn't know better, I'd say they're broadcasting some kind of emotional or mental state. It's unlike anything I've ever seen. Elena studied the data, her mind racing. What if they're not just communicating with each other? What if they're trying to communicate with us? Torres looked up from his engineering console. You mean this whole offering demand might be their way of trying to establish contact? Think about it, Elena continued. If you're a species that communicates primarily through emotions or mental states, how do you make contact with beings who communicate through words and symbols? You'd need some kind of shared experience, some common ground. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they were running out of time. In less than 24 hours, the Draknari deadline would arrive. Elena made her decision. Shen, prepare a shuttle. Dr. Kim, I need you to install every biomonitoring device we have. If my theory is correct, this encounter is going to be about much more than simple survival. As the crew prepared for what might be their final mission, Elena stood alone in her quarters, staring at a photo of her own family back on Earth. Her sister's children smiled back at her from the frame, their innocent faces reminding her exactly why she was about to risk everything. The children of Kepler 442b deserved the same chance at happiness, at life, at a future free from the shadow of this impossible choice. And, if Elena was right about the Draknari, then, tomorrow's confrontation might not end in tragedy after all. But, first, she had to survive long enough to prove her theory. The shuttle bay doors closed with a metallic clang, sealing Elena's fate. In 18 hours, she would face creatures from another galaxy, armed with nothing but hope, determination, and the radical belief that communication was possible even between the most unlikely beings. The stars outside her viewport seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Elena's shuttle descended through the atmosphere of Kepler 442b as dawn broke across the devastated colony. From her pilot's seat, she could see the true extent of the damage the Draknari had inflicted. Entire city blocks had been reduced to glass where intense heat had melted buildings into flowing sculptures. But what struck her most was the precision of the destruction. This wasn't random violence, it was surgical, calculated. The colony's makeshift command center crackled to life on her communication system. "Captain Rodriguez, are you certain about this plan?" Governor Martinez's voice carried the weight of a man who hadn't slept in days. "As certain as I can be, Governor," Elena replied, checking her biomonitoring equipment one final time. "Remember, regardless of what happens to me, don't let them pressure you into their original demand. There has to be another way." She landed the shuttle in the colony's central square, where a crowd of desperate colonists had gathered. Men and women clutched their children close, their faces etched with the terrible knowledge that time was running out. Elena emerged from her shuttle wearing a simple flight suit covered in biosensors, looking remarkably calm for someone about to face creatures that had terrorized an entire world. "Mommy, why is that lady going to the dragons?" asked a small voice in the crowd. Elena knelt down to the child's level, a girl of perhaps 6 years old with bright brown eyes that reminded her of her niece back on Earth. "Because sometimes adults have to do scary things to protect the people they care about," she said gently. "But, don't worry. I have a feeling those dragons aren't quite what they seem." Standing back up, Elena activated her personal communicator. "Dr. Kim, are you monitoring my biosigns?" "Loud and clear, Captain," came the reply from orbit. "Heart rate elevated but stable. All sensors functioning normally." Elena walked to the center of the square and activated a portable amplifier. Her voice carried across the silent colony as she addressed the empty sky. "Draknari vessels, this is Captain Elena Rodriguez of the merchant ship Prosperity. I hereby formally offer myself in place of any child from this colony. I am an adult human, 38 years old, and I come willingly to meet your requirements." For several long moments, nothing happened. Then, the sky began to darken, not with clouds, but with shadows that moved with purpose and intelligence. The Draknari ship descended like a living mountain. Its surface rippled with organic textures that pulsed with internal light, and, as it drew closer, Elena could see that it was breathing. Massive gill-like structures along its sides expanded and contracted rhythmically, while bioluminescent patterns flowed across its hide like slowly moving constellations. The ship settled onto the ground with surprising gentleness, its massive bulk somehow avoiding any damage to the surrounding buildings. Then, an opening appeared in its side, not a mechanical door, but an iris that dilated like a gigantic eye. 3 Draknari emerged, and Elena got her first close look at the beings that had terrorized the colony. They were even more magnificent and terrifying than the recordings had suggested. Each stood 4 meters tall, their scales reflecting light in patterns that seemed to shift and change as she watched. But it was their eyes that captivated her, golden orbs that held an intelligence so ancient and profound that Elena felt momentarily dizzy staring into them. The center Draknari, larger than the others and bearing intricate crystalline growths along its crest, stepped forward. When it spoke, its voice resonated not just through the air but somehow directly into Elena's mind. "Human female, you are not what was requested," the Flamekeeper said, its mental voice carrying undertones of curiosity rather than anger. "We asked for a child, one whose mind remains open to the deeper currents of reality. Your mind is hardened, shaped by years of seeing only the surface of things." Elena felt her biomonitors registering the strange mental contact, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Then, why are you still here? If I'm not suitable for your purposes, you could have simply refused and maintained your original demand." The 3 Draknari exchanged what Elena could only interpret as glances, though their alien features made reading their expressions impossible. "You intrigue us, Elena Rodriguez," the Flamekeeper continued. "In our travels across the galaxy, we have encountered many species. Most react to our presence with fear, anger, or attempts at violence. You offer yourself willingly, despite having no understanding of our true purpose. Why?" Elena took a deep breath, acutely aware that the next few minutes might determine the fate of everyone on the planet. "Because I don't believe your purpose is what it appears to be," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her own voice. "Your technology is clearly advanced beyond anything we've seen. If you wanted resources, you could take them. If you wanted slaves, you could simply overpower us. If you truly fed on human children, you could have taken them by force days ago. But, instead, you made a demand and gave us time to respond. That suggests negotiation, not predation. The Flamekeeper stepped closer, and Elena could feel waves of heat radiating from its massive form. Up close, she could see that its scales were not simply black but contained swirling patterns of deep color that seemed to move independently. You believe we are testing you, it said, and Elena caught something like approval in its mental voice. I believe you're trying to communicate something important, and this is the only method you have available, Elena replied. The question is, what message are you trying to send? The Flamekeeper raised one clawed appendage, and Elena felt her biosensors registering energy fluctuations unlike anything in the medical databases. Then, without warning, images began flooding her mind. She saw the Draknari homeworld, a planet where massive crystalline structures reached toward the sky like frozen lightning. But the images that followed showed that world dying, consumed by some cosmic catastrophe that turned its surface into molten glass. She saw the Draknari themselves, not as the fearsome predators they appeared to be, but as refugees fleeing the destruction of everything they had ever known. More images followed showing their journey across the galaxy, their desperate search for a new home. But, wherever they went, their appearance and their unfamiliar methods of communication led to fear and violence. Species after species drove them away, unable to see past their terrifying exterior to the desperate people within. You're not conquerors, Elena whispered, understanding flooding through her. You're refugees. We are the last of our kind, the Flamekeeper confirmed, its mental voice heavy with ancient sorrow. Our world died in fire, consumed by the very stars we once worshipped. We have searched for generations, seeking not conquest but understanding. A place where we might be allowed to exist. Elena felt tears on her cheeks as more images flowed through her mind. She saw Draknari children, smaller versions of the adults but with the same golden eyes, the same desperate hope. They weren't demanding human children as sacrifices, they were asking for cultural exchange, for someone young enough to learn their methods of communication and serve as a bridge between species. The child you requested, Elena said, pieces falling into place. You wanted someone who could learn your mental communication methods. Someone who could help establish real contact between our peoples. Young minds are more adaptable to our ways, the Flamekeeper agreed. But, we understand now that to you, this appeared as a demand for sacrifice. We did not realize how our request would be interpreted. Elena looked back toward the crowd of colonists, many of whom were now creeping closer despite their fear. Then, why didn't you explain? Why the mysterious demands and threats? How does one explain color to the blind, the Flamekeeper asked. How does one describe the song of the cosmos to those who hear only words? We tried many approaches with many species. All ended in violence and rejection. This time, we hope that by making our need clear and giving time for consideration, we might find those wise enough to see beyond the surface. A smaller Draknari stepped forward, and Elena sensed that this one was younger, perhaps equivalent to a teenager in human terms. Some among us argued against this approach, the younger being communicated. They said humans would be like all the others, driven by fear and unable to see truth. But the Flamekeeper believed that humans might be different. That you might have the wisdom to look deeper. Elena turned back to the Flamekeeper. What made you think humans were different? Your stories, came the surprising reply. As we observed your species, we found that your mythologies, your fictional tales, often spoke of communication with beings like us. Dragons, you call them in your ancient stories. Sometimes feared, sometimes wise, but always portrayed as capable of meaningful interaction with humans. This suggested to us that your species might have the conceptual framework to understand our nature. Elena felt a laugh bubbling up despite the gravity of the situation. You studied our mythology to understand how to approach us? We have learned that mythology often contains deeper truths than what your species considers factual history, the Flamekeeper replied. Your stories spoke of humans who could speak with dragons, who could see past fearsome appearances to find wisdom and knowledge. We hope to find such humans here. Looking around at the crowd of colonists, Elena saw that many were now listening openly, their fear slowly being replaced by curiosity. Children peeked out from behind their parents' legs, staring at the Draknari with wide eyes that held wonder rather than terror. You found them, Elena said softly. But, your approach nearly caused exactly the kind of misunderstanding you were trying to avoid. Indeed, the Flamekeeper acknowledged. We see now that directness would have served better than mystery. But we feared that revealing our true nature too quickly would trigger the same rejection we have encountered elsewhere. Elena activated her communicator. Dr. Kim, are you recording all of this? Every biosignature and energy reading, Captain, came the reply. This is incredible. The communication method they're using appears to be a form of controlled telepathy, but it's more complex than that. They're sharing actual experiences and emotions, not just words. Elena looked back at the Flamekeeper. If we can establish proper communication between your people and ours, would you be willing to share your knowledge? Your technology could help us, and perhaps our perspectives could help you. This has always been our hope, the Flamekeeper replied. We seek not to conquer but to contribute. Our knowledge of energy manipulation, of biological integration with technology, could benefit your species greatly. In return, perhaps you could teach us new ways of existing in a galaxy that often judges by appearance rather than intention. As the biosensors continued recording the unprecedented interspecies communication, Elena realized that they were witnessing something that would change the course of human history. First contact had been achieved not through grand diplomatic ceremonies or military confrontations, but through one person's willingness to risk everything based on the belief that understanding was possible. But the most challenging part still lay ahead, convincing both species that cooperation was not only possible but essential. The next several hours transformed the colony square into something resembling an impromptu diplomatic summit. Elena found herself serving as an interpreter between two species whose communication methods were so fundamentally different that meaningful exchange seemed impossible at first. The Draknari communicated through a complex combination of mental imagery, emotional resonance, and energy pattern manipulation that Elena's biosensors could detect but barely comprehend. Humans relied on verbal language, gesture, and written symbols that the Draknari found frustratingly limited and imprecise. Yet gradually, through patient effort on both sides, a bridge began to form. Dr. Kim descended from the Prosperity with additional equipment, transforming Elena into a living translation interface. The biosensors now not only recorded the Draknari communication patterns but began to identify recurring elements that could be mapped to human concepts. It's like learning a new form of mathematics, Dr. Kim explained to the growing crowd of colonists and Draknari observers. Their communication includes dimensions of meaning that our language simply doesn't have words for. When the Flamekeeper shares a concept, Elena experiences it as a combination of visual image, emotional state, and what I can only describe as a conceptual framework. Elena nodded, still adjusting to the strange sensation of thinking in multiple modalities simultaneously. It's overwhelming at first, but also incredibly precise. When they share the concept of home, I don't just understand the word, I experience their longing, their memories of their lost world, and their hope for finding a new place to belong. Governor Martinez approached cautiously, his relief at the peaceful resolution of the crisis evident in his posture. Captain Rodriguez, on behalf of the colony, I can't express our gratitude. But I have to ask, what happens now? Can we trust them? Can they trust us? It was a fair question, and one that Elena was still grappling with herself. The Draknari had revealed themselves to be refugees rather than conquerors, but the gulf between their species remained vast. Their technology was so advanced that they could easily overwhelm human civilization if they chose to, while their alien appearance and communication methods would likely trigger fear and misunderstanding among most humans. The Flamekeeper wishes to demonstrate their good intentions, Elena said, turning to relay the message she was receiving through her mental link. They're offering to help repair the damage they caused to the colony. What followed was Elena's first real demonstration of Draknari capabilities beyond their intimidating appearance. The three aliens moved through the destroyed sections of the colony with graceful precision, their clawed appendages manipulating energy fields that Elena could see as shimmering distortions in the air. Buildings that had been melted into glass began to reshape themselves, returning to their original forms but somehow stronger and more beautiful than before. The Draknari weren't simply reversing the damage, they were improving upon the original structures, integrating crystalline support elements that made them more resistant to seismic activity and environmental stress. This is impossible, whispered Chief Torres, who had transported down to witness the reconstruction. They're manipulating matter at the molecular level, but without any visible technology. How? The answer came through Elena's growing understanding of Draknari biology. Their crystalline growths weren't decorative, they were biological energy manipulation organs, evolved over millions of years to interface directly with the fundamental forces of physics. Each Draknari was essentially a living tool capable of feats that humans would require massive technological installations to achieve. But, more than their technological capabilities, Elena was beginning to understand the Draknari's psychological profile. They were a species that thought in terms of geological timescales, where the concept of patience was measured in centuries rather than minutes. Their social structure was built around collective memory and shared experience, making them natural archivists and teachers. They're offering to share their knowledge, Elena announced as the reconstruction continued. But, they want something in return that's more valuable to them than our technology or resources. What could we possibly offer beings with such advanced capabilities? Asked Dr. Kim. Elena smiled, feeling the warm pulse of Draknari approval through her mental connection. Stories. Human creativity, imagination, and emotional expression. They've been traveling the galaxy for generations, accumulating knowledge but losing the ability to create new cultural experiences. They want to learn how we imagine, how we dream, how we create art and literature and music. The revelation sparked an unexpected reaction among the colonists. Children who had been hiding behind their parents began stepping forward, their natural curiosity overcoming their fear. Artists and writers in the colony began approaching the Draknari with eager questions about their experiences across the galaxy. One particularly bold 10-year-old named Marcus walked directly up to the smallest Draknari and began showing it a collection of drawings he had made of spaceships and alien worlds. Elena found herself translating a conversation that rapidly became more complex and fascinating than any diplomatic negotiation. The young Draknari was sharing mental images of worlds they had visited, crystalline forests where the trees sang in harmonious frequencies, gas-giant atmospheres where floating creatures danced through aurora-filled skies, and ancient ruins left by civilizations that had transcended physical existence millions of years ago. In return, Marcus was explaining human concepts of adventure, heroism, and friendship through his drawings and stories. The cultural exchange was creating something entirely new, a hybrid form of communication that combined human narrative structure with Draknari experiential sharing. This is it, Elena realized, her excitement growing. This is what they'd been searching for. Not just knowledge or resources, but genuine cultural synthesis. The creation of something new that neither species could achieve alone. The Flamekeeper approached her, its mental voice resonating with ancient satisfaction. You understand now why we sought the young. Not to harm or consume, but to learn from minds not yet limited by the rigid categories of adult thinking. Your species possesses something we have lost, the ability to imagine futures that do not yet exist. Elena felt tears of joy rather than sorrow this time as she grasped the full implications. You're not just refugees looking for a home. You're teachers and students seeking to preserve and expand the cultural heritage of the galaxy. Indeed. Each species we encounter adds to the great library of galactic consciousness. But, humans create entirely new ways of thinking about existence itself. Your science fiction, your fantasy literature, your dreams of impossible futures, these represent a form of mental evolution we had thought extinct. Dr. Kim was frantically recording everything, her equipment struggling to keep up with the rapid exchange of information. Elena, the implications of this are staggering. If we can establish permanent communication protocols, the scientific and cultural advancement possibilities are limitless. But, Elena was thinking beyond the immediate possibilities. The successful contact with the Draknari would inevitably become known throughout human space, and the reaction would likely be mixed. Some would see the opportunities for advancement and cooperation. Others would focus on the potential threats posed by beings of such immense power. Flamekeeper, she said, humans are not all alike. Some will welcome you and seek to learn from you. Others will fear you and possibly try to drive you away, just as other species have done. How do we prevent that from happening? The response came not just from the Flamekeeper but from all three Draknari simultaneously, a harmonized mental communication that conveyed the weight of centuries of painful experience. This is why we chose to test your species through seemingly threatening circumstances, the collective voice explained. We needed to identify humans capable of looking beyond surface appearances to deeper truths. The colony's response to our demands revealed much about human moral reasoning. Your willingness to sacrifice yourself for children you had never met showed us the potential for ethical behavior that transcends immediate self-interest. Elena nodded, understanding the elegant complexity of their approach. You weren't just seeking communication. You were selecting for the kind of humans capable of building a lasting relationship. Precisely. And we have found not just one, but many such humans in this small colony. The parents who agonized over an impossible choice rather than immediately surrendering a child. The engineer who spoke of his own daughter when considering the moral implications. The medical officer who sought to understand rather than simply fear our biological differences. Each of you has demonstrated the psychological foundation necessary for true cooperation. As the day progressed, more colonists joined the cultural exchange. Musicians played recordings of human music while receiving Draknari harmonic compositions that existed as pure mathematical relationships rather than sound waves. Scientists shared human theories about physics and cosmology while absorbing Draknari knowledge of energy manipulation techniques that seemed to operate outside conventional physical laws. The transformation was remarkable to witness. Fear was being replaced by wonder, suspicion by curiosity, isolation by connection. Elena found herself thinking about the broader implications for humanity's future among the stars. "We need to document everything," she said to Dr. Kim. "Not just the technical aspects, but the social and psychological processes that made this peaceful contact possible. This could become a model for future encounters with alien species." But, even as she spoke, Elena knew that the real test was yet to come. News of the Draknari presence would soon reach human military and governmental authorities. The peaceful atmosphere of cultural exchange in the colony square might not survive the arrival of officials who viewed first contact primarily as a potential security threat. The Flamekeeper seemed to sense her concerns. "Do not fear the challenges ahead, Elena Rodriguez. Today has proven that understanding is possible. That knowledge will sustain us through the difficulties to come." As the twin suns of Kepler 442b began to set, casting long shadows across the transformed colony, Elena looked around at humans and Draknari working together on projects that neither species could have conceived alone. Children were learning to think in images and emotions while young Draknari experimented with verbal language and written symbols. It was just the beginning, but it was a beginning filled with unprecedented promise. 6 weeks later, Elena stood in the observation deck of the newly constructed Kepler 442b Cultural Exchange Station, watching as ships from across human space arrived in the system. The peaceful colony square had been transformed into humanity's first official diplomatic outpost for interspecies relations, but the mood was far from the harmonious cultural exchange she had witnessed in those first magical days. Military cruisers from the Earth Defense Force hung in formation alongside research vessels from various human colonies, while merchant ships brought representatives from major corporations eager to acquire Draknari technology. The political implications of first contact had quickly overwhelmed the cultural aspects that Elena and the colonists had found so fascinating. Captain Rodriguez, Admiral Sarah Chen approached her with the crisp efficiency of someone accustomed to command. "The Joint Colonial Council has asked me to debrief you once more before the formal negotiations begin. There are still significant concerns about the security implications of this relationship." Elena turned from the viewport, her expression carefully neutral. Over the past weeks, she had been questioned, tested, and analyzed by representatives from every major human governmental body. Her role as the primary interpreter between species had made her simultaneously indispensable and suspect. "Admiral, I've shared everything I know about Draknari capabilities and intentions. They are genuinely peaceful, seeking cultural exchange rather than conquest. The threat assessments your analysts keep generating are based on worst-case scenarios that don't match the observed behavior patterns." Admiral Chen consulted her data tablet. "Captain, these beings can manipulate matter at the molecular level and demonstrate what appears to be telepathic abilities. A single Draknari vessel could theoretically level an entire city. Surely you understand our caution. And a single human ship with antimatter weapons could sterilize a planet's surface," Elena replied. "The capability for destruction doesn't equal the intention to destroy. The Draknari have had numerous opportunities to demonstrate hostile intent, and instead they've spent their time helping colonists improve their agricultural yields and teaching children new mathematical concepts." Through the station's large windows, Elena could see the Draknari ship still resting in the colony square below. What had initially seemed like a threatening presence now looked almost protective, its organic curves contrasting beautifully with the geometric human architecture that surrounded it. Several smaller Draknari vessels had arrived over the past weeks, bringing additional refugees eager to participate in the unprecedented cultural exchange. Dr. Kim approached them, her arms full of research data and her expression mixing excitement with exhaustion. "Admiral Chen, Captain Rodriguez, you need to see the latest results from the Communication Interface Project. We've achieved something remarkable. She led them to the station's main laboratory, where a complex array of biosensors and quantum processing equipment filled an entire wall. At the center of the setup, a young colonist named Sarah Williams sat connected to the interface while mental images appeared on surrounding holographic displays. Sarah has become our most successful human Draknari interpreter, Dr. Kim explained. Watch this. The display showed a complex three-dimensional structure that rotated slowly, revealing layers of detail that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could normally perceive. As Sarah concentrated, the structure transformed, becoming recognizable as a molecule but one engineered with precision that surpassed anything in human chemistry databases. The Draknari call this healing crystal synthesis, Dr. Kim continued. It's a medical compound that can repair cellular damage at the genetic level. Sarah learned to understand and reproduce the mental techniques required to design it, bridging the gap between Draknari intuitive knowledge and human analytical methods. Admiral Chen studied the displays with obvious interest despite her security concerns. What are the practical applications? Potential cures for genetic diseases, enhanced healing for traumatic injuries, life extension possibilities we're only beginning to understand, Dr. Kim replied. But, more importantly, this proves that meaningful knowledge transfer is possible. Humans can learn Draknari techniques, and they can learn ours. Elena felt a familiar warm pulse through her own mental connection with the Flamekeeper, who had been observing the demonstration from the adjacent chamber. The ancient Draknari's approval resonated through her consciousness like gentle music. Admiral, Elena said, may I suggest you experience direct communication with the Flamekeeper? Words can't adequately convey the nuances of their perspective, but direct mental contact might address your security concerns more effectively than any briefing. Admiral Chen hesitated, her military training warring with her curiosity about the unprecedented situation. Is it safe? Completely, Dr. Kim assured her. We've monitored dozens of communication sessions. The Draknari cannot alter human thoughts or implant suggestions. They can only share their own experiences and perceptions. 20 minutes later, Admiral Chen emerged from the communication chamber with an expression of profound amazement and subtle transformation that Elena had seen on every human who had undergone direct Draknari contact. I felt their history, the Admiral said slowly. The destruction of their homeworld wasn't just an intellectual concept, it was a lived experience of overwhelming loss and determination to preserve their people's knowledge and culture. They're not expansionist conquerors, they're librarians trying to save the collective wisdom of extinct civilizations. Elena nodded, understanding the paradigm shift occurring in the Admiral's mind. They've been traveling for generations, collecting and preserving the cultural achievements of species that no longer exist. They see themselves as guardians of galactic heritage. But why didn't they simply explain this from the beginning? Admiral Chen asked. The Flamekeeper's mental response came through Elena's interface. How does one quickly explain the concept of archaeological responsibility for extinct cultures to beings who have never faced such loss? How does one convey the weight of being the sole repository for the dreams and achievements of 1,000 dead worlds? Elena relayed the response, adding her own interpretation. They tried direct communication with other species, but it typically resulted in demands for immediate access to their preserved knowledge, often followed by attempts to exploit or steal their cultural archives. The testing approach allows them to identify species mature enough to engage responsibly with such vast repositories of power and knowledge. Over the following days, Admiral Chen worked with Elena and Dr. Kim to establish new protocols for human Draknari interaction. The military concerns remained valid. The Draknari were incredibly powerful beings, but the security framework shifted from defense against invasion to protection of an invaluable cultural partnership. The real breakthrough came when the Draknari shared their great archive with selected human scholars. Elena found herself experiencing the preserved memories of civilizations that had flourished and died billions of years ago. She walked through the crystal cities of the Etherian collective, witnessed the mathematical poetry of the resonance builders, and felt the bittersweet joy of the star gardeners as they seeded new solar systems with the potential for life. This is what they've been carrying, Elena explained to the assembled human representatives. Not just knowledge or technology, but the actual experiences and creative achievements of entire civilizations. They're offering to make us partners in preserving and extending this cultural inheritance. The implications were staggering. Humanity would gain access to scientific and philosophical insights developed over cosmic timescales, while the Draknari would benefit from human creativity, imagination, and capacity for innovation. But, more than that, both species would become part of something larger, a galactic community dedicated to ensuring that no civilization's achievements would ever be completely lost. 6 months after first contact, Elena stood once again in the colony square, but now it had been transformed into the heart of a thriving interspecies community. Human and Draknari children played together, creating art forms that neither species could have imagined alone. Scientists from both cultures collaborated on projects that pushed the boundaries of possibility, while artists and musicians explored new dimensions of creative expression. The young Draknari who had first shown interest in human stories was now working with a team of human writers to create narrative forms that combined experiential sharing with traditional storytelling structures. Their collaborative works were spreading throughout human space, inspiring a renaissance of creative and intellectual achievement. "You realize what you've accomplished, don't you?" the Flamekeeper asked Elena through their private mental connection. Elena smiled, watching a group of children, human and Draknari, work together to design a crystalline sculpture that seemed to capture starlight and transform it into music. "We've proven that understanding is always possible," she replied. "No matter how different two species might seem, there's always a bridge that can be built between them." "More than that," the Flamekeeper responded. "You have demonstrated the principle that will guide galactic civilization for millennia to come. When faced with the unknown, the first instinct should be curiosity rather than fear, communication rather than conflict." Elena nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility and the joy of accomplishment in equal measure. The sacrifice she had been prepared to make had become something far more valuable, a foundation for the future of interspecies cooperation. As she watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Elena knew that this was just the beginning. Somewhere among the stars, other species waited to be discovered, other opportunities for understanding beckoned. And, when those encounters came, humanity would be ready, armed not with weapons and suspicion, but with the knowledge that every being in the galaxy had something valuable to teach and something important to learn. The Draknari had offered a test disguised as a threat, and humanity had responded with wisdom disguised as sacrifice. In doing so, both species had discovered that the greatest treasures in the universe were not resources to be hoarded or territories to be conquered, but relationships to be cherished and knowledge to be shared. The child who had been offered to the dragons had become the bridge between worlds, and, through that bridge, the galaxy itself had become a little less dark and a great deal more wonderful.